Hey everyone, welcome to Startup Sisterhood LA, also known as SUSLA. I'm your host, Drake Africa, and this is the podcast where we share real stories from incredible women here in Los Angeles. We talk about the ups, the downs, and everything in between, including how these women are making positive changes for themselves and others. Whether you're building your own business, working on a passion project, or just looking for some inspiration, you're in the right place. We're all about building a community of women who support and uplift each other. So light a candle, get comfortable, and let's dive into an amazing conversation with Keanakay, a SUSLA entrepreneur and author of Viewers Discretion Advised. Viewers Discretion Advised is a memoir that immerses the reader into the life of a young girl trying to survive homelessness and foster care. She has worked to advocate for policy change in the foster care system and has been featured on NPR's Morning Edition, Fox News, and other print, radio, and TV programs. She speaks regularly about the issues of foster care and homelessness. Without further ado, let's get into it. I wanted to ask, what was life like for you before encountering Alexandria House?
Chaotic. Yeah, it was chaotic. I didn't have any kind of stability. I was always trying to grasp at it without really knowing what I was looking for. I just knew that I needed better and more. And that was like the motivation for anything, was like looking for better, either for myself, for my children, looking for more opportunity, to have access to more, to try to be better. That sounds really vague, but that's the best way to sum it up.
Yeah, to kind of get into the weeds of it, I guess I'll start with where are you from and what was it like growing up there?
I actually don't know where I'm from. I was born in Long Beach, and I only know that for sure because my birth certificate says so. I don't know where I grew up because I went to foster care at 4 and I moved around. So I was in and out of foster care from 4 until I aged out at 18, going back and forth between the system, living with family, it's called King Gap, or living with my mom. So I don't have a place where I can say I grew up here because I was some of everywhere.
Yeah, moving around a lot.
Yeah. At one point in foster care, I moved every 6 months. It's maybe for almost 2 years.
Yeah, a lot of different families moving you around then.
Mm-hmm. Go from home to home, and homes can be in the same city, different city. Doesn't matter. Like at one point, I was in Little Rock, out by Palmdale, and then I went from Little Rock to Inglewood, from Inglewood to South Central LA, from South Central LA to like the east side of LA, then back again to South Central. So
yeah, up, down, left, right.
Yeah, everywhere.
Just throughout the city.
Mm-hmm.
What was it like having to move around so much?
Destabilizing. I could never truly get comfortable anywhere because I didn't know how long I was going to be there. I mean, going into foster care in general is destabilizing because you're essentially going to go live with strangers because your home environment is not safe. And so you've experienced whatever trauma you've experienced, whether it's neglect, abuse, what have you, and you go from being abused and neglected to dropped off with these strangers that you don't know that are supposed to be better. In theory, not always the case. Majority of the time, not the case. And you're going to go live with these strangers. They're not your family. And even if they are, you're like an outsider coming into this new dynamic that has to adjust to your presence. And they may or may not. There were instances where I would go into a home and they had children already, like biological children already. And there was a clear distinction between like me and them. There was no like I knew like I don't belong here because this is not my family. There's instances where it's like you're a burden, and they let it be known that I was a burden to them by entering their home through no fault of my own. And even any behavior that I displayed that would be considered normal childhood, like normal appropriate child behavior, was made to be deviant or criminalized, and I wasn't given the same kind of grace or compassion that you would give to another kid. Like, for example, I have an 11-year-old who does not like to shower. It's a kid thing. They go through this phase where they just want to be dirty. It is what it is. if I were to do something like that, like with me, if she doesn't want to shower, it's a conversation and it's like, you got to shower because you stink. I wouldn't get that. It would be, you're just disgusting and you just don't know how to act and it's because of your mother and it's this and it's that. It's not, I'm just being a kid doing kid things. Or if I acted out in school, it happens. It's because I wasn't raised right and I have no home training and, like there wasn't any exception, like, no, this is a kid. This is a child who's experienced something traumatizing. Maybe that's why this is happening. There was no, well, now it's called trauma-informed care, but there was no compassion, no empathy for me as a child going through life experiencing these things.
Yeah, like the leniency is not given, even from people who know your situation,
Mm-hmm.
like they still can't cut you that slack that, you really should have. Even if you're not in foster care, like children should be allowed to be kids.
Yeah.
But it seems like the people who were supposed to be taking care of you didn't always have your best interests at heart.
Right. I mean, it's hard because foster care in general is an incentivized system. It looks like, on the outside, it looks like, oh, we're helping these kids get into better situations. But honestly, the way that they recruit parents is by incentivizing them through monetary gain. So you take this child into your home, we're going to pay you. And you get a monthly stipend for them being in your home to offset expenses for having this extra person in your house. And so why wouldn't someone want to be a foster parent if they can get an extra $1,000, $2,000, sometimes $5,000 a month for one child being in their home? When, they have bills or they want to go on vacation, they want to be able to get a new car and that's out of their means, but with one kid in their home that they don't have to provide the same care to as they do their own children, anybody would take that. And people do take it for that reason. Like take children in for that reason. Or I call it collecting children because in foster care, they have a system. They don't do it anymore. It's done differently now. But when I was in foster care, they had a rating system. And so it was like letter grades. But the higher the letter, the worse your rate was. Like the higher the letter, the worse your behavior was, or the higher your need of care, which meant more money for the parent. And so there were foster parents who would only take certain, like D and F rate, which is like was the highest. Most of the time it's like behavioral, emotional, like those kind of things. But sometimes it could be medical, like you have a kid who has a lot of medical needs, but you get paid more money for that. And so they collect these children for that reason, not because they want to help them or because they're compassionate or they're loving, but because it's a paycheck and it's more money in their pocket.
Wow, so they're literally having children kind of ranked against each other and I want to say fighting for spots based on monetary gain for the parents, it seems.
Right. The younger a child is, the easier a child is to be placed because everybody wants babies. As they get older, naturally are going to act out. They're finding themselves. They're figuring out who they are. They're peer pressure and the like. They have those things happening. Then they've experienced whatever kind of trauma that got them in the system in the first place. Those two things combined are recipes for disaster. And so like they have to incentivize it in a way to make people want to take older children because most people don't, because they don't want to deal with that. Like think about yourself as a teenager. Your 16, 15-year-old self just going to high school, puberty's happening, you're figuring yourself out. There's girls or boys, there's, school, now you have to figure out your future on top of everything else. And then add to that, you're being abused at home. And then you go from being abused at home, whatever that may look like, to now have to live with these strangers that are not my family, I have no emotional, social connection to these people. And I'm supposed to just adjust and adapt immediately. That's traumatizing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what the system is.
Yeah, it's not just the child that has the baggage coming into that household either. It's also the parents. They're bringing their own approach to that child, and even if you have problems that you're trying to work on as someone going through the system, you also have to adjust to other people's problems as well, and it seems like it kind of compounds itself. Like everybody's having their own issues that are created in this system. I always had been introduced to foster care and adoption as a kind of situation similar to people getting pets. People want to get puppies instead of dogs from the shelter or strays. They want a very like perfect child that they can just kind of mold into whatever they want. But I always thought that children don't really work that way. You can't mold someone into whoever you want them to be. Like, it's better to just accept them for who they are. But it seems that a lot of these people weren't necessarily approaching you with that in mind.
Yeah, not at all. And I think it makes it hard because most people, or at least I did, have this idea that once you become a parent, you have the most say so in what your child does, how they become, how they develop. And that's the furthest thing from the truth, is you really don't. You try to equip them as best as you can and hope that they make the right choices. But ultimately, the choices and decisions that they make are theirs, and it has little to do with you, the parent, or you, the person that's raising them, and everything to do with them figuring themselves out and finding themselves. And there's this assumption that that's not true. That's a false narrative. Like, children are these multiple things that you can kind of train it to be how you want. And in some cases you can. That's also abuse. But for the most part, you can't. And having a child come into your home with this predisposition of, they're going to be this well-behaved child. It's not going to be any issues. There's not going to be any trouble with them, sets both the parent and the child up for failure. So I agree that it is very much so, like, people go into foster care with these rose-colored glasses, not really fully grasping the totality of what the journey that they're embarking on.
I guess so. That is a very unfortunate but accurate picture, it seems, of the experience in that system. But I also wanted to ask you if you did have a support system growing up, maybe outside of these households.
So I had a mentor when I was maybe 16, 17, and she was like a really pivotal person in my life. Her name was Daphne, and she took me to fill out my first job application, helped me get my first job. She introduced me to yoga for the first time, and like veganism, anything. Like, she treated me like a kid, so anything that I was curious about or had questions about, she made it a point to like give me access to the information so that I could make a decision for myself. I learned about Scientology. I did Scientology for a little while, like, just because I was curious. And she didn't demonize me for having questions or not agreeing or not knowing things.
Yeah, she let you kind of follow your own path then.
Yeah. So I say that she was pivotal because I still, even today, have that same kind of approach to life. Like, if there's something that I'm curious about, I'm more likely to try it because I remember her letting me try things. If there's something I want to try, I'm less hesitant to not do it because I know that the worst I can do is fail. And even that's not a big deal because I probably won't remember it anyway. Neither will anybody else. So it doesn't even matter. So I'd say that's why I say she's pivotal, because I think that I'm an adventurous person because of her.
You can't really try anything new or transformative unless you're ready to fail. I think that's what stops a lot of people from seeking out personal development or to try to escape from a toxic situation because they don't know what's on the other side. But it seems like she enabled you to really seek that for yourself. And was she involved in your personal development for a long time?
No, actually, she was only around for a couple months. The group home that I was in didn't like that she was only involved with me because she was wealthy. They wanted, this is so messed up. So one of the girls in the home also had a mentor, and I'm using the term mentor loosely in this instance, but she had a mentor who was famous, and him and his wife would regularly like donate to the group home. They would have like Christmas events for us and get us like all these gifts and get people to donate to the group home. They wanted my mentor to do the same thing, and she was like, nope, I'm just here for Kiana. That's it. I don't care about any of this other stuff y'all got going on. This is my person and that's it. And they didn't like that, so they stopped me from seeing her.
Oh, they literally
Yeah.
they cut her off? Or?
Mm-hmm.
Oh. And you never saw her again after
No.
that? Oh, man.
I didn't see her again until it's been within the last 5 years.
Oh, so there was a good, decade-long gap?
Mm-hmm.
So? Something like that?
Yeah, I reached out to her on Instagram and I asked her if she remembered me, and she said yes. This was like at the tail end of the pandemic. I reached out to her. She said she remembered me, invited me to lunch. We had lunch and caught up on a decade plus worth of stuff. And then we exchanged numbers, and I talk to her every once in a while.
I'm sure she's very proud of you after everything that you've accomplished for yourself. Like, just to back it up a little bit, like, how did you meet?
Oh yeah, so I was a part of this group called Hershey. I don't think it exists anymore, but it was a group started by this lady named Kennedy, and it was for girls, like teenage girls, young girls, and I called it Etiquette Boot Camp because we went away to Pepperdine University for like a week, and we got to do yoga, we got to do writing workshops, we got to go like bowling and do different activities. But then at the end, we had like this cotillion type thing, and so we had to learn how to dance and sit and eat properly and do all of that stuff. And we had this big dance at the end, and you got to get dressed up and got our makeup done, and you got assigned a mentor after that. And so that's how I met her.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's cool. Do you still follow that etiquette?
No.
Yeah, these elbows are staying on the table. Like,
oh my gosh, I was the worst. I gave everybody such a hard time. I was the worst student. I did everything wrong on purpose. I didn't pay attention to any of the stuff they told me to do. I don't use it. I sometimes, but for the most part, no.
What kind of etiquette were they trying to have you practice? What is it?
So, like, sitting down the proper way to sit down in a chair when you're in a dress or a skirt, how to walk down the stairs when you're in a dress, like the different knives and forks for like the big table setting. I don't remember any of that. Where you're supposed to place your napkin, how you're supposed to place your fork and knife on your plate when you're finished, how to properly spoon soup out of a bowl.
There's a proper way for that?
Yes. So that it doesn't clink or make noise.
Oh, okay. Yeah, gotcha. Yeah, I'm sure that didn't stick too much.
No.
God, okay. That's really fascinating. I had no idea that they had programs like that still.
Yeah. So. They only did it I could be wrong. To the best of my knowledge, it only happened a couple years, and then I don't know what happened after that because I didn't keep up with the group. Life happened. So I don't know. As far as I know, it was only a couple years. I think there was maybe it only ran for 3 or 4 years, and I've never heard of anything like it since. Yeah.
Okay. Hey guys, this is Editing Drake here. I want to provide an auditory content warning for the people who are listening to the podcast and not necessarily watching their screen right now. In certain sections of this episode, we'll discuss Keanakay's journey navigating housing insecurity, and that includes the manner by which she recovers from suicide attempts and sexual assault. We'll be discussing these topics in more depth during the timestamps listed on the screen. And really quick, if you're ever in crisis and need someone to talk to about life's challenges, there are resources available that can help. We encourage you to call 988, a suicide prevention hotline that's available 24/7, 365. Remember that you're not alone, and even when hope seems lost, it's never too late to make a change. How would you describe your mental state at that time when you were still moving between families?
It was not good. I had been hospitalized so many times for attempting to kill myself. It seemed like they would let me out of the hospital just for me to try to kill myself again. So that was how I would characterize that time. Multiple suicide attempts.
Did you want to talk about that more? You want to move on?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's hard because it's kind of blurry for me, so I can't go into detail. I just remember there being one incident in particular. I was staying in Kedron, and my mom had came to visit me, and I had just went back into foster care, and I was hospitalized. I hadn't been in foster care long. I had to be maybe no older than 10. And my mom came to visit me, and she told me that I should kill myself because it was my fault that my sister and I had ended up in foster care because I had called the police. Her and her boyfriend at the time, my brother's dad, had gotten into a fight. They got high, got into a fight. She hit him over the head with a vase, and there was like blood everywhere. And I called 911, and they came and took us away. And she told me I should kill myself for that because it was my fault. And then I remember I did. After I got out of the hospital, I went and hung myself in the closet in my foster home. I obviously didn't kill myself because I'm still here, but I tried.
No, I understand.
Yeah, so that, I think, characterizes my experience as a whole, because every time something happened or I had to move, I would always think that I would be better off dead because it was my fault. Like, everything was happening because it was my fault. Not that my mother shouldn't have been a drug addict and she should have picked better men, or, she had mental health issues and addiction issues. Like, that never occurred to me as a kid. It was always, this is my fault and I shouldn't be here.
And that was your biological mother?
Yeah. That's heavy.
So, it was from that point forward, the fight, that it was the CPS that put you in the system?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Got it.
Yeah.
I'm glad you're still with us.
I am most days.
Mm-hmm.
I have my moments still, but most days I'm glad to be here.
Your sister, was she also with you for these experiences, like at these households? Like, did you move to the same places? Or?
We were together up until I turned 8, and then after that we got separated.
Oh, got it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you know? Is she?
I don't have any contact with her now. She's doing fine. She's a nurse.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah.
I'm sure it was really hard on both of you, because I'm sure she might have internalized what your mother had said as well. I can't imagine hearing that from the person who's you'd assume that they want to be the one to take care of you.
Yeah, I think I'm kind of numb to it now. Like, it's easy to talk about it because I've disassociated from it so much, and my mother has said so many different things to me that it's just like, it's just one more thing. Like, that is not the worst thing she's ever said to me. I wish it was, but it's not. So it's one of those things where it's like, I don't realize or recognize that that's a bad thing until I see somebody else respond to it, like reaction to it, because it's the reality that I've lived with my whole life. So it's just like, you don't know that this is wrong until someone tells you it is. And so it's like sitting here this moment, I'm like, oh, you shouldn't say that to a child, but I don't recognize how wrong it is until I'm like watching you react. And I'm like, oh, this is really bad. You shouldn't say this to children.
Well, we all experience a very different reality, like depending on the environment in which we're brought up. Like, it seems that at every turn where things could have turned around for you, it seems like you were just like brought back down by just a lack of support, it seems.
Yeah.
I was going to ask then, I mean, we don't have to get into like how you became homeless if you don't want to.
Oh, it's fine. I turned 18 and aged out of foster care. Boom,
okay.
Homeless.
Okay. Got it. Okay, so you turned 18, and how long was it between that gap and your residency here? Was it a long time?
I was 28 when I came here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So,
Was it 28? 27.
So there's a long period then of, I read that you were chronically employed, but you were still homeless at that time.
Mm-hmm.
What was it like, having to be in the workplace, but also not have a stable home then?
It was humiliating and demoralizing and frustrating. Well, when I was younger, like before I turned 21, it didn't register to me that that's what was happening. It was just like, I turned 18, I left California, right before, so my social worker had told me when I was like 7, almost 18, like I was maybe 3 or 4 months away from turning 18, that I would be homeless once I turned 18 because she wasn't going to recommend me for IOP, so independent living, where they help supportive housing for after you age out. Because of my behavior and just how reckless I was, she didn't think it would be a good fit. And so I started making plans knowing that I was going to be homeless once I turned 18. I didn't have anywhere to go. And so I went to Florida. I worked as a housekeeper at the Holiday Inn, and I worked overnight at Target as in the stock room. And I got an apartment, but in my head, once I paid the deposit and I turned everything on, I never had to pay again because no one taught me about bills or budgeting. And so I got evicted, I think maybe 2 months later, because I hadn't been paying rent. And I hadn't been paying any of the bills because I thought once you paid once, that's it. You don't have to pay these things every month. There was nobody that taught me about bills or budgeting or anything. And even like when I went to the property to apply for the apartment, the property manager had to help me fill it out and tell me that I had to turn on like the water or the lights and gas, because I complained when I went to the apartment and everything was dark and there was like nothing working. It's like, you have to do this yourself, and had to walk me through steps because I didn't even know how to do that on my own. So I got the apartment, I got the eviction. We know that once you have an eviction on your credit, it's next to impossible to get another place. So I couldn't, even though I was working and I had that I learned through trial and error, like, okay, once I get in, I got to do this every month. I couldn't get into anywhere because I had this eviction on my credit, and I didn't know that I could get it off by paying the money back and it would go away. And so I was just stuck in the cycle of having jobs because there was no point up until I came to Alexandria House where I didn't work multiple jobs. I think there was maybe a year where I didn't prior to Alexandria House. But other than that, I've always had 2 or 3 jobs. And so having money, but not being able to get in an apartment, not really understanding what's happening, paying to like sleep on people's couches or, because there was only one instance where I was like actually renting a room. Other times it was just me paying. Like, I'll give you X amount, let me sleep on the couch or, on the floor in your kid's room, something. And, having to pay these people to keep a roof over my head or paying to stay in hotels, not really understanding like why this is happening or how to get out of it. So it was just this frustrating cycle of feeling like, again, this is my fault. This is happening because it's my fault. I didn't do something right. And because I didn't do something right, this is why this is happening. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, you were staying with coworkers, strangers,
coworkers, friends, not really family, strangers mostly.
This is all in Florida for this.
Well, no. So I was in Florida for a little bit. I came back to California when I was pregnant to stay with my biological mom, and then she kicked me out, and then I went to ILP, and then I was there for a year, and then I left there, and I went to go stay with my sister's boyfriend's friends, and then I lived there with them, and then I went from there to, and I'm probably messing this timeline all up because my concept of time is off, especially with like past stuff because I have PTSD, so I can't keep things in chronological order. But yeah, so I was there, I was in Texas for a little while, I was in Alabama for a while, I was in DC. I've been
anywhere where you could find the opportunity
to work. Yeah, anywhere that I thought that I could work or I would have an easier time getting a job, I went.
Moving between these places, it seems like a very drastic change from the outside looking in. Mm-hmm. Like going from state to state. It must have been a desperate time.
It just felt like I was a mother at the time, and so I got pregnant with my first daughter when I was 19. And I was just trying to survive and do the only things that I knew how to do. So if someone said, oh, you can come stay with me, I'm not going to charge you, because that was always how I got. Oh, you can come stay here, I'm not going to charge you to stay here, I'll give you time to get on your feet. I was going because at the end of the day, I wanted to have a different life for my daughter. And I didn't want her to grow up feeling the way that I felt. So I did whatever I thought was best at the time with my 18-year-old knowledge, my 20-year-old knowledge, which wasn't very much. So it didn't feel drastic to me because I had already had the pattern of moving because I was in foster care and I moved every couple months. So moving state to state wasn't that big of a jump when I moved city to city because I never had roots anywhere anyway.
That's a perspective that seems very natural then to develop, when you're moving around so much in your youth, like it's only natural then to proceed to keep moving around as an adult. But also, in your situation, you really have to take anything you can get, really, it seems.
Yeah.
What was it like then raising your daughter while in this position?
It was hard. I struggled a lot because I didn't know how to be a mother. I was still a kid. I didn't even know how to be a kid, really. I was just doing the best I could with what I had and what I knew I didn't want to be. And I made a lot of mistakes, which happens because kids don't come with a handbook and tell you how to raise them. And I fought against still wanting to be young. So there was this wrestle between wanting what I thought was a good mother and me still wanting to have the 21-year-old experience, the 23-year-old experience, still wanting to go out and still wanting to have friends and still wanting to have a social life, but also having this little person that I'm responsible for, and that internal battle with feeling like if I took time out for myself to go hang out with my friends or to disassociate for a little while, because ultimately that's what it was, dissociating from the reality of whatever my situation was, it made me a bad parent. It made me neglectful. And so it was tough for a very long time because I never felt good enough. And I always felt like I had something to prove. And I had this overwhelming fear that my kid would end up in the system. So
you were doing your best to avoid that outcome of having someone go through what you just went through, because it seems like your whole life up until that point, you've been struggling to find any semblance of independence. And having to depend on others, and then also having someone depend on you, it seems like it would be just incredibly difficult to try to balance that, trying to have independence for yourself but also be someone that others depend on.
Yeah.
Was there anyone who might have been helpful at this time, like the father?
No. So ironically enough, I ended up losing my daughter when she was 3. And she didn't come live with me until she was 12. Her paternal grandparents offered to help me, but they didn't actually want to help me. And that's how I ended up in Alabama. They said, because at one point when I was living in DC, I had just, trigger warning. So I had just been raped in DC and I was struggling with my mental health because of that. And I couldn't get any kind of support services. I was afraid to report it. Because it wasn't enough that I had been violated in such a way, I was also being stalked. And so the guy would, because I smoked cigarettes at the time, he would come to the hostess stand at my job at the restaurant that I worked at and would leave packs of cigarettes. And on the clear lining in between the pack of cigarettes and the box and the film, he would leave notes for me and leave them at the hostess stand. And I would come back and there'd be this pack of cigarettes with a note for me. He would leave notes on my car. I found out he copied the keys to my car. One day I came out of work and I went to the parking garage and my car was gone. And he just moved it just to let me know that he could always get to me. There was another time I had went out with my friends and we were clubbing on U Street, and he texted me asking me what I was doing on U Street. U Street is in DC, is where all the college clubs are. So it's a popular area to go hang out and party. And so he's like, what are you doing on U Street? And I'm like, how do you know I'm here? And so I found out that my neighbors were relatives of his. And so every time I would leave the house, they would tell him when I would leave. Or if I had someone come over or, whatever, if I was home and he would show up. Because I couldn't figure out how he always knew when I was leaving or how he always knew how he was always where I was going without being here all the time. And I tried to move, but I couldn't get any services because the program, I can't remember the name of it, but the program that I tried to go through to help me move wouldn't help me because it wasn't considered domestic violence, because this was just a friend. It wasn't somebody that I had a relationship with. It was just a friend. And he wasn't even my friend. He was my ex-fiance's friend. And so because of that, they wouldn't help me with moving. And so I was just living in my car. And my mental health took a dip and I didn't want to live anymore. And I asked some friends in DC if they would take my daughter because I couldn't do it anymore. And I didn't want to. I always thought of my mom as selfish because she picked drugs over her children. And she picked partying and stripping and everything else over her children. She never put us first. And I didn't want to be that person. And so in my mind, if I was going to kill myself or if I was going to do anything, because at that point I had started using drugs. I have ADHD. And I had an Adderall prescription. I was abusing it and I was drinking really heavily. And I was, because I couldn't deal with what happened to me. And in my mind, I was like, there's no way for me to get up every day and face what I have to face and not be high or not drink. But I can't be selfish like my mother and put this over my kid. But I don't know how to survive and keep living after what's happened. And so I asked some friends if they would take her because I was like, I can't do it. I don't even want to make that choice. And they took advantage of me. I thought I was signing paperwork to give them legal guardianship. It was actually adoption papers. And because they were adoption papers, the dad had to be served as well. And so her paternal grandparents found out about it because they opened his mail, found the paperwork. And I didn't tell them what happened. I just told them I was having a hard time in DC. And they said to come to Alabama and they would help me. Once I got to Alabama, it was not what they said. They immediately started trying to adopt her and take her from me. And they got her. Just some of them, make a long story short, because they did a lot of things. Like when I wouldn't let them just outright adopt her, they forced me into giving them legal guardianship. They said if I didn't give them legal guardianship, they would kick me out. And I was in the middle of bumfuck Alabama. Like when I say country, I mean have you seen the traffic lights that still hang on a wire? Traffic lights still on a wire, one grocery store, no public transportation, middle of nowhere.
Town of 10 people?
Yes, seriously. Middle of nowhere. So if they kicked me out, I had nowhere to go. There wasn't even a shelter. That's how small this place was. Like there was no like, oh, I'm gonna just go to the homeless shelter. No, there was no shelter for me to go to. I would have to go to the next town over. And you notice I'm saying town and not city. I would have to go to the next town over to even go to a shelter. And that was 20 miles away. So, and without a car and no public transportation, I couldn't get there. So I had to give them legal guardianship. It went from legal guardianship to I got a job in the next town over. My first day of work, when I pulled up, because I got hired as a server at Olive Garden. When I pulled up for my training, the grandma, she goes, as I'm getting ready to get out the car, she goes, by the way, you can't come back to the house. I hope you have somewhere to live. And left. Luckily, by that time, I had made friends. And so I was a friend of mine helped me get a room for rent. And it took me a couple months to even get enough money saved to be able to go back to the next town, like to pay somebody to go take me back to the town to even go get my daughter because I had her. Because they were supposed to just be watching her while I go to do training. And that's not what it was. So it went from that to them convincing me to let her spend Christmas with them. And they said that she would come back. And instead of bringing her back, I got served with emergency guardianship paperwork saying that they had been given custody of her because I dropped her off on her doorstep and they didn't know how to find me. And they made me go to court to prove that I was fit. And in court, the judge said that he didn't feel comfortable with giving me custody of my daughter back because I didn't have a real job. He said waitressing was not a real job. And because I was pregnant with my second child and I wasn't with the father. He said he would have felt more comfortable with my daughter being in a 2-parent home than a 1-parent home. And I was making the same mistake by choosing to co-parent instead of get married. And I lost custody of my daughter. So that happened. And it took 10 years to get her back.
You still see her?
Yeah, so she came to live with me when she was 12, right before she turned 13. And she's gone to go live with her dad now. It's been tough.
That situation in Alabama, was that long before you came back to California?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so you were there for a while before you even came close to Alexandria House.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
I was there for almost, I think I came to Alabama in 2011, maybe 12. I left in 2015.
Yeah, how did you even come across Alexandria House?
Google.
Oh. So you moved back to California for Alexandria? Or?
No, I moved back to California because I had a stroke. My mother, I got in a car accident and I hit my head so hard I had a stroke. And my biological mom told me to come home, said she would help me. When I came to California, I came in a wheelchair because I couldn't walk, with my youngest daughter, who was 2 or 3 at the time. When I got here, it was hell because long story short, the only reason why she wanted me to come back to California was because she thought I was going to die, and she had a life insurance policy taken out on me, and she wanted to make sure that neither of my kids or the guardians for either of my children could claim the life insurance policy. And so she wanted, since the oldest one was with her grandparents, she wanted my youngest daughter to be with her, so that way she could claim guardianship of her and make sure that she got to keep the money should I die from this stroke. Because I was a stroke and they said I had an aneurysm. So it was like we were waiting for me to die. But I didn't die. And I got better. And once I got better and she realized I wasn't going to die is when she told me what she was planning on doing. And then she kicked me out of her house. See what I mean? When I said I wish that was the worst thing she's ever done when I was a kid. So that's what brought me here. And I lived with... so I went from there to, because mom stayed, I don't know where she is now. She stayed in Victorville. So I went from Victorville to Northridge, and I stayed with a friend in Northridge. And then I went from her house to a friend from church. I stayed with her in LA. Then I went from her house to staying in a shelter, and I use that term loosely because it was not a shelter, in East LA. And it was so bad there, I wanted to die. They charged $500 for a room, and it was a shared space. And so it was me and my baby, my 3-year-old, sleeping on a twin bed in a room. The room that I shared was with the lady who had schizophrenia and had hallucinations, and I would wake up in the middle of the night and she'd be standing over my bed talking about she had to exorcise the people out of me. She would leave pills on the floor, so I was afraid to let my baby play in the room. They said that they would help us get housing, and they didn't. I wasn't working at the time, and so I had CalWorks, and I only got $560 a month. $500 went to this rent, and I had to live off of the $60 with a baby and diapers. It was hard because diapers are expensive and I had more needs than just diapers. There was Wi-Fi in the house and we had to pay for the Wi-Fi. It was $25 a month for Wi-Fi.
On top of the $500?
On top of the $500. So it was $25 a month for Wi-Fi, and one of the ladies got kicked out for giving me the password to the Wi-Fi so that I could apply for jobs, because the lady who owned the house was real strict on that. I was going to church at the time, and she didn't like, the lady who owned the place didn't like that I was going to a church that was different from hers because she was a pastor. And so she would threaten to kick me out if I didn't join her church. And so I had to stop going to my church and go to her church and attend her church services, or risk losing my housing. I had tried to go to school and I had gotten permission to miss one of the little house meetings to go to this orientation for school. I got a phone call from the lady at the shelter saying if I didn't make it back in 30 minutes then I'd get kicked out. And I was in North Hollywood. The shelter was in East LA. Even though she'd given me permission, it was so much. I wasn't allowed to pray in the house. If I got caught praying, then I could be kicked out. Yeah.
So it was kind of just another group home then.
Yeah.
from what you'd experienced earlier in life.
Yeah.
But this time it was even more strict.
Yeah. And I was paying there.
And you were paying.
Mm-hmm.
And you had no social worker this time to...
Nope. No help, no nothing. It was just me. So I got on Google and I Googled every transitional housing I could find and called and called and called every number possible until I found Alexandria House. Because it was either I got out of there, and I remember praying and talking to God, and I was like, look, either I get out of here or I'm going to kill myself. Because I can't do it. I can't keep living like this. There's no point in me living like this. There has to be more to life than this, whatever that shit was. So, yeah. Alexandria House literally saved my life. Because that was my option. I was dead, I was done. It was either, once I got in touch with someone here and they said they had space and I was able to do an interview, it was like, it's either that or I'm going to die. I'm not even, and I will be damned if I fail.
Was that process of getting residency here, what did it feel like when they told you yes?
I was so relieved. I remember crying. They didn't even have a room ready for me. So Marissa's office downstairs was a temporary holding room. And I stayed there. I didn't even care. I was sleeping on a pull-out couch in that room with me and my baby. And I didn't even care because I had so much peace. And I was there, I don't know, maybe a month before an actual room in the greenhouse became available. And it didn't even matter because I told them, I was like, I can't wait a month. I don't care what you got to do, where you put me, just get me out of here. Mm-hmm. And they did. They made an exception and got me in. Yeah. Even though they didn't technically have space for me that was ready.
Because they heard your story.
Well, no, I didn't even tell them that I was planning on killing myself if I didn't get in. They didn't know that. I was just like, I can't stay where I'm at. And they worked it out.
Yeah, they really did. I mean,
yeah.
You're still here, and it seems like after you got in here, things were just getting much better.
Yes and no.
Oh, worse before better.
So the thing about getting somewhere safe is it's always the most unstable, because now you have time to fall apart. And so it looks like shit when you first get somewhere safe or somewhere stable, because now you can afford to fall apart, because when you're on the streets or in these situations, it's not safe. It's not safe to cry. It's not safe to be vulnerable in any kind of way. It's not safe to look like you're a target, because it could literally become the difference between someone taking advantage of you, someone assaulting you, someone robbing you, someone harming you, and you getting to see another day or another moment. And so you can't afford to do any of that when you're on the streets or when you're couch surfing or when you this. You can't fall asleep. You can't fall into a deep sleep because somebody might rob you. You can't cry because then that looks like you've made yourself a target and somebody might try to sexually assault you. You can't do any of that. And so when you get somewhere safe where it's like, oh, you can cry here, you can go to sleep here and not worry about your things going missing. You can eat here and not have to worry about whether or not there's going to be food again. You fall apart, you start to fall apart, because holding that together for years and years and years is draining. And when we first came, my baby, she used to eat until the point that she would throw up, because I wasn't always able. Once the food stamps run out, we didn't have food. And where we were staying at, the shelter we were staying in, they didn't provide food. And so I would have to make food stretch as much as possible, but it could only go so far in a month, or so I wasn't letting her eat as much. I wouldn't let her eat until she was full. I would just let her eat just enough, or I would go days without eating to make sure that she could eat until she was full. So it was having to make those kind of sacrifices. So when we got here, she used to eat so fast and so much that she would make herself sick, until she understood that hey, every day that we come here, there's going to be dinner, because somebody's going to come and cook. Every day we come here, there's a pantry and there's snacks in there for you. Every day that we come here, you can make yourself a sandwich. Well, she was baby. I can make you a sandwich and there's going to be food. Like, this is not a fear that you have to have anymore. So for the first couple months, she was eating until she was sick, whether she liked it or not. The fact that she's as picky of an eater as she is, to me, is a sign of growth, because now she has that option where before we didn't. Or like the first 3 months that I was here, I didn't take my stuff out of bags. I was living out of garbage bags. Had a room, still in garbage bags. Was too afraid to put things in drawers because I was like, I don't know if I'm going to be here. They could tell me to leave tomorrow and then that'll be it. It took months for me to actually settle in, to recognize like, this is safe. It's not going anywhere. We're going to be okay. It took months for my baby to recognize that. And no, it was not better when I first got here. It was a lot harder in ways that I didn't anticipate. And it got worse before it got better. And in some instances, it still is.
Yeah. I guess getting time to actually process what is happening and be vulnerable, it's such a drastic change. Like, I would assume you feel like an entirely different person.
Yeah, it does. Me today is different from the person that walked into Alexandria House, for sure. That person was scared. That person was insecure and fearful and timid and mean. But it was all out of necessity. Like, I needed to be that to survive.
What would you say was the most impactful for you about your residency here? Whether that be mentally or just situationally.
The most impactful thing for me was being able to join the Speakers Bureau. I think because it allowed me to give voice to what I was feeling, what I experienced, and connected to a larger issue outside of myself, and have that be validated in a way that I had never experienced before. Because up until that point, everything that I experienced, I knew intrinsically that it wasn't unique to me, but I couldn't quantify it in any kind of way. And so once I joined the Speakers Bureau, it allowed me to feel validated in knowing, like, no, this is systemic. I'm not to blame. Like, that voice that I had lived with since I was a kid was not in fact true. Like, no, these are systemic. These are institutional things that I have been going up against. I was just another cog in the machine and didn't know that socially it was structured in a way for me to fail. And yes, I may have made some poor decisions, but those poor decisions shouldn't have such drastic outcomes, but they do for some and not for others. And that is what makes it systemic, and that's what makes institutional failures.
You can only work so much with the cards in your deck.
Right.
It really is a true gamble in life on how many choices you have available to you. Going back to talking about necessity, right? I can't think of a point in your story where I would say, like, oh, obviously she should have done something different. Just hearing what you said to me, I just can only appreciate that you were able to keep moving forward with the choices available to you. I've only talked to you for like an hour, but like, I already have an immense respect and reverence for everything that you went through. I'm new to Alexandria House. I've never been in social work.
Mm-hmm.
I've had an extremely different life to you. I had like a normal, quote unquote, childhood, going to school, and I'd being raised by both my parents, my brother, together, everyone. Went to college and for film. And now I'm working here and I get to see everyone's perspective be truly validated, because I go around people who would, see you on the street or on the couch and be like, oh, like, that's a bum.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like, no, like, you're a person with an experience that is not even like unique. There's so many women here who like go through something so similar. And it's really valuable to me that I get to hear what you said. And I'm glad that the speakers group that you were a part of was able to kind of get you to this room with me right now.
Yeah.
I thank you for that. Going back to like the narrative here, with that speakers group, like that was kind of the main opportunity for you to kind of voice your life, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like all your experiences. I know there's therapists here too. I was also wondering if you were able to talk to someone like more like personally. Like,
Oh yeah.
yeah.
I took advantage of therapy all the way up until it wasn't offered anymore.
Mm.
And it was my only source of therapy, and it helped me so much. Not just me, but it helped my daughter too, to grow and to address some of the fears and to recognize some things are, like, my feelings are true because they're mine, but they're not always based in fact. And so I like being able to separate feelings from fact and helping to better regulate myself, because I was triggered by so many things and I didn't know that I was being triggered and what that even meant or what was happening in the moment when it was happening because of PTSD, and like being taken back to moments where like traumatizing moments and not being able to pull myself out of them. I was able to get the tools to be able to do that, to have hope for anything.
Getting that when you had none beforehand, like it's like an entirely new feeling being discovered. It's almost like getting like your sense of like hearing or like sight back.
Yeah. And it even helped me as a mother because I was angry at my youngest daughter's freedom. This is going to sound so backwards, but I was angry at her for the mother that she had because I didn't have that. I wasn't allowed to say no to something or to dislike something or to dress however I wanted to, or, you know, be my own person. I wasn't given that freedom. And to see her be this little confident person in her like confident in herself and her likes and her dislikes and who she is and how she is used to make me very angry. And I had to recognize, like, through therapy, I recognized that, like, no, I'm just grieving for kid me that didn't have that, because it's in my face what could have been. Like, I could have thrived the same way that she is, despite what we went through in the first 3 years of her life. Like, she's thriving now and doing amazing. It's okay for me to be sad, to grieve that. Like, had my mother been able, I don't want to cry. Had my mother been able to, like, get out of herself, there could have been opportunity for me to thrive, because my daughter is evidence of that. No matter what, even though the first 3 years of her life was very tough and it was hard, and she's had to experience things that she doesn't even remember. I know that they were there, but to see her now and no evidence of it makes me sad for me, because that could have been my reality and it's not. And I had to learn how to, like, first recognize that it was grief that I was experiencing and allow myself the process of grieving that at every developmental stage that she goes through, because it's a new kind of grief as she gets older.
Seeing a life that you could have had feels like it might have been like taken away from you. And in that regard, it is so understandable to me. And to have that kind of revelation, it must have like flipped a switch.
Yeah, for sure. Because I didn't have the normal childhood, I don't recognize what's normal kid behavior as normal kid behavior, because it's not normal to me or regular to me, because it wasn't my experience. So I have to regularly, and I learned it through therapy, like regularly remind myself, she's just being a kid. This is what kids are supposed to do. This is developmentally appropriate. And that's okay, because she's doing what she's supposed to do. It's not a slight towards me or anything else. And then, like, as I recognize those things, it makes me sad for myself, because it's like, oh, nobody recognized that for me. It makes me wonder, not as much now, but it used to make me wonder, like, what kind of life could I have had it been recognized? And instead of being labeled as a deviant or a criminal, or like having my behaviors labeled as criminal, as normal childhood behavior, or this is somebody that's hurting, or this is somebody that's traumatized, like, what kind of difference could that have made?
Yeah. Now we're kind of closer to where you are now in your life story. to bridge that gap, I was going to ask, with that impact of residency, do you see that impact like manifested once you left?
It was tough. I had to learn a lot of things over again because there are things that you don't have to consider when you're homeless. I don't have to worry about cleaning up anything because I don't have a house to clean up. So who needs to buy cleaning supplies? Not me. Like, that's not a thought when you're homeless or you're couch surfing, you know, or homeless and couch surfing are the same thing. But like when you're on the street, I'm not mopping floors on the sidewalk. Like that's not a thought. So I don't need to own a broom. That's that. What do you need a broom for? You're homeless. Like, there were things that I just didn't consider. I hadn't had to consider that once I got into my own place, I struggled with because I was recognizing how much I didn't know and how much I didn't have to think about being homeless. And then there came the fear because this place was the second apartment I'd ever been in from 18. So at 28, I got my second ever apartment. So my first experience with, I don't know how to turn on anything, I don't know how to do anything, now I'm homeless because I didn't know I needed to pay bills every month, to now, like, I know this, I know I need to pay bills every month. Now I have this fear of whether or not I can do it. Like, I know I need to, and I know it needs to happen, but there's a fear of, am I capable of doing this? And what if something happens where I can't do this? Then I'm going to end up back where I was at again. Mm. And so there's that fear, and it never goes away. It's been 6 years, and I'm still afraid every single month.
Yeah, you're always having that voice in the back of your head, like, oh, like, can I do this?
Yeah.
Or, am I doing it right?
Can I do it? Am I doing it right? Do I have enough? What happens when I don't have enough? Because that's happened a bunch where different things have come up and I just didn't have it. And there's the fear of, now what? Because Alexandria House really has been the most stability I've had in my entire life. And, well, yeah, soon to be 35 years. Like, this is the most stable I've ever been.
Yeah, like now you're in a kind of in-between stage, you know,
Mm-hmm.
You're always asking yourself, like, am I going to go forward? Am I going to go backwards? Maybe that will never go away. I don't know.
Well, so I have depression and I have anxiety and I have PTSD. I also have ADHD, which is a nice little fun combination of hell.
Hellish cocktail, mental cocktail.
It's the hellish kind of, it's hellish.
Yeah.
I'm less affected by PTSD than I was when I first came, but anxiety and depression are always here, right? And so when I'm depressed and I can't get out of bed for a week, and the most I can do is get my kid to school, that's the most energy I have. I'm not working, or I quit my job altogether, because I have done that, because it's too much of a strain to try to get up to get to work. Where before I could be like, hey, I'm depressed, and it may not really register, but I just don't have it, versus being in a situation where it's like, I'm depressed and I need to have it. It's a different kind of pressure because I don't get the same kind of grace. And it makes it hard because depression is not, I feel sad, you know, I'm having a bad day. It's like we have made it so casual, we use it in a conversation and it doesn't actually apply. Like, no, depression is like, I can't brush my teeth. I don't want to eat. I don't care that I haven't showered in a week or two, or I don't remember the last time I showered, or, you know, the only reason that I'm still going is because I have this little person to take care of. Like, that's the depths that it goes to, where, like, it got to one point where I quit my job. I was not working. I wasn't going to school. I wasn't doing anything. I was doing the minimum that would be required so that DCFS did not interfere and take my kid away. The minimum. I kept food in the house. I made sure that she was clean and that she went to school. And I wasn't even doing a good job of making sure she went to school every day. But it got so bad that I was afraid to leave the house, because every time I left the house, I would think about killing myself. Like, I didn't drive because I was terrified that I would run into oncoming traffic or into a center divider on the freeway, or, you know, run a red light so I could get hit. I didn't leave to go like on the roof when we had a patio. I didn't do that because I thought about throwing myself off. And one time, one of my neighbors, she doesn't live with us anymore, had to stop me because I did try. I couldn't do anything. I was terrified for my own self, and I didn't know what was happening. I was asking to be hospitalized, but I couldn't because I was afraid of losing my kids. Because then I'm like, I can't deal with that on top of everything else. So I just stayed in the house, and I never left for months. Months. Did not leave. All I could do was be like, I need help, without being able to articulate the depth that I had sunk into, and saying I need help. Like, damn the bills. I need help to just want to live, and not having the ability to access that help. Because things are different now, was a new low that I didn't expect or ever anticipate experiencing here. And so having had that experience, having had to pull myself out by myself from that place and get outside resources for my own mental health sake, I can't even imagine being in a position where I just get any lower, because I know that there's not going to be help for me.
It's interesting just to know that, life doesn't stop, of course, but also that for some of this, like getting to take care of your new home, at some points it could feel like that responsibility is a privilege relative to what you had to do before, where you're just scrambling to find a place to stay. Now that you have more responsibilities, though, it's also a new kind of pressure, and you're constantly grappling with that, having to send your girl to school, having to pay the bills, rent, show up to work. So there's like a kind of duality, it seems like, once you're on your own. And to me, it seems like you have worked really hard to kind of face that duality, to like see both sides of it. I don't know, it just makes me think of balance. On one hand, like, you are working really hard to maintain this, but also on the other hand, you are in a place where you want to be, now that you're not scrambling like you used to.
Yeah.
Like, it seems like things, they didn't get easy, but, maybe they did get easier in some ways and harder in other ways.
I think that it just became a new kind of hard. Like, I have this saying that life is hard. Sometimes you get to choose your hard and sometimes you don't, but it's hard. Everything is hard. There's nothing easy about living or existing. And I think that going from being on the streets and couch surfing, that's hard. But having to pay rent and bills is also hard. Having to deal with mental health is also hard. Undiagnosed mental health, untreated mental health is hard. Treating mental health is hard. Like, it's not like you get a diagnosis and now everything is better. Like, no, now you have to learn how to live with it, as opposed to like letting it overtake you. Then we don't make, this society as a whole doesn't make exception for mental health or physical health. And so having to live with that and deal with that is hard. Having access to healthcare is hard. Not having access to healthcare is hard. There's no one is easier than the other. It's just a different kind of hard. And I think that helps me. But then also knowing that I refuse to believe that this is all my life is going to be. This can't be it. Like, I can't have experienced everything that I've experienced, gone through as many things as I have gone through, survived as many suicide attempts as I have survived, for this to be it. Like, that would be shit. Like, I would be pissed to survive and go through so much and overcome so much for this to be as good as it gets. Like, I refuse to accept that. And I think that refusal to accept it is also what keeps me going. Maybe it's delusion. I don't know. Because statistically, it says this is as good as it's going to get for me unless I like magically become famous overnight or something and I hit the lottery. Like, statistically, societally, like in society as a whole, institutionally, like all of the systems say this is it for me. This is the glass ceiling. And I refuse to accept that. Like, this can't be it. It just can't.
Yeah. It's like God didn't let you live through all of this just to have it go the same way over and over again.
Yeah.
At some point, something's got to give.
People believe what they believe. I believe in Jesus and am Christian. But there's a story in the Bible about the children of Israel and how they wandered the desert for 40 years. In that 40 years of them wandering, they aged, but everything that they owned did not. And so, like, God sustained them and kept them through this 40 years of wandering and generations past, so on and so forth. But at the end, they finally made it to a promised land. Like, after all of this wandering in the desert and, you know, having to eat the same thing over and over again, things not changing. Because could you imagine that? You're physically getting older, but your clothes never change. They never get worn out. You have the same sandals on. Like, but you're, like, everything around, you're in the same place in the desert. Because it was what was only supposed to be 11-day journey ended up being 40 years. So could you imagine? They're only moving really small. Like, they're only moving increments, like small increments. So your surroundings aren't changing. Nothing is changing but you are. And to see that and the mental strain that it would take on a person to experience that, and then to have to fight to get to a promise that God has given you, like this land of promise and prosperity. And I feel like my circumstances, for the most part, have stayed pretty much the same. I've gotten older, but I was homeless for 10 years. I'm still a paycheck away from homelessness now. Like, things have gotten incrementally better, but for the most part, they haven't changed. But I have. And so it has to be like, I'm not changing these small amounts and things are not moving this at such a slow pace for it to not have a promise on the other side of it. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Like, they went through 40 years of the same thing but it ended with a promise. So it's like, I went through 35 years of the same thing, but it has to end in a promise. Like, there has to be a something. Mm-hmm. It may not be like a grandiose something or, you know, I'm like Jeff Bezos, but there has to be something. Yeah.
And yeah, like, I've heard it before too. Like, someone was saying that life gets really tough, but so do you. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you are one tough motherfucker. Like, you see some shit. So I can't imagine like anything at this point being like worse than what you've already been through. You know, like, knock on wood.
No, seriously.
Yeah. On that note, I was gonna, sort of head towards the end of this. Mm-hmm. What would you say is the most important to you regarding your mental health?
Remembering that I can only do what I can do. And if I didn't do it, then I couldn't. Whatever, and applying that to everything. So if I didn't wash the dishes, I did what I could do for the day. I'm back in school right now, and I didn't finish my reading. I did what I could do. There's this pressure because of my belief in there being more and better and this not being it. I feel this pressure, self-imposed, to always be the best and do the best and present the best. And when I don't, I feel like a failure, and everything failed. So I have to constantly remind myself that I can only do what I can do. And if I didn't do it, then that means I couldn't.
I think that sort of feels as though you are being kind to the person that you used to be, that child who was always told, like, this is not enough or you're not doing it right. Mm-hmm. I think now is your time, your chance to be kind to that person, to trust yourself and say, like, hey, like, you gotta cut yourself some slack. I deserve to try my best. And even when it doesn't work out, I at least did something.
Yeah.
And that is more valuable than anything, I think. Every day, everyone in the society is always told, like, hey, there's a right and wrong way to be. But really, that's something that we have to find for ourselves, I think. And sometimes it's not a matter of right and wrong. It just is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And unless like we can accept that, there's no way to move. So I don't know. I like your perspective on it. That's what I'm trying to say. I don't know. I'm like trying to be conclusive about things, but you know, I also have to accept that I'm not really like solving a problem. I'm just going to recognize it and then deal with it to the best of my ability.
Mm-hmm.
Before I close this off, I was also going to ask if these are things you've discussed in your book.
Some of it, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I've talked about different experiences while being homeless and through third person narrative, telling my story and how it felt. I think right at the time, I just wanted to write and I was enjoying writing and getting it out. But looking back, I feel like it was purposeful because I feel like you get to live the experience with me when you read the book. It's not just someone telling you this happened and then this happened and then this happened. Like, no, you get to insert yourself into the story and get an understanding of how these things could happen. We hear about them all the time. We talk about prison to school pipelines, or we talk about foster care to homelessness pipelines. We talk about like all of these things, but we never talk about the how they happen, or we never get a look inside how they happen. And I feel like my book gives that.
Yeah, I definitely think it's important to put yourself in the place of someone else, like speaking their words as though they were your own.
Mm-hmm.
So I think in that way, like your literature will be incredibly valuable to so many people, which is why I wanted to shout it out.
Thank you.
Yeah, and for our listeners, Keanakay also has a candle business, a Keanakay Candle Co.
Yeah. I'm still trying to get this Etsy going. I'm slacking.
Yeah, and we'll have a chance to see that in December at the Christmas market at Alexandria House on December 15th. There'll be more information about that released in the bio of this podcast video. And finally, I'll say, for our listeners, remember that these stories are not just tales, but challenges. These are stories of resilience, strength, and the transformative power of stability. If you find yourself in a similar situation, we invite you to call 211, which is a resource available in multiple languages, allowing those in need to access information and obtain referrals to physical and mental health resources, housing, utility, food, and employment assistance, and suicide and crisis interventions. So with that, I thank you for joining us today. As we conclude this session, we want to leave you with a sense of empowerment. Empowerment to learn more, to engage with community, and to be a catalyst for positive change. So until next time, stay informed, stay engaged, and remember that your voice has the power to shape a better future. Well, thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe, share, and follow us on social media to stay connected. And welcome to the Sisterhood.